Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Moroccan chicken tagine. That's right, I'm going to show you how to make what I think is the best lemon chicken recipe of all time, as well as one of the best chicken recipes of all time. And by the way, it's not really a tagine if you don't cook it in a tagine. But I don't have one, and you probably don't have one, so I'm going to show you how to make one without it. And it's still going to be every bit as good. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by taking a nice big pinch of saffron, which you will find right next to all the other spices at the store. And we'll put that in a small bowl and then pour over some boiling chicken broth. Or if times are tough, you could just use water. And what we'll do is let that sit and steep for about 20 to 30 minutes, or until it cools down to room temp. And by the way, the saffron is optional, and not every recipe calls for it, but mine does. So if you can get it, I hope you use it. And then the only other semi-exotic ingredient we're going to have to source would be some preserved lemon, as in preserved in a lot of salt for a long time. And what we'll do is cut this in quarters after removing that little hard thing where the stem was attached. And by the way, this is not an optional ingredient. All right, this is going to give the dish its signature flavor, so you really do need to find these. And you will, but if you can't, you can definitely make them. And we can provide you with some info on how to do that. And once we do have that cut in quarters, we're going to very carefully trim out the flesh and separate it from the peel, since we're going to use the inside for the marinade, and then we'll cut up and add the outside to the tagine later. And by the way, you never want to cut towards yourself. Right, this time it's fine because I'm doing it, but generally we want the blade going away from us. But one way or another, we're going to trim that out, and then you're probably definitely going to have a few seeds, which we will find and scrape out and push to the side. And then once the inside of our preserved lemon has been seeded, we will give it a very fine chop. And then we'll transfer that into a small bowl, since like I said, we're going to use that for our marinade. And then as far as the peel goes, we'll cut each of those pieces in half to make 8 strips. And we'll be adding that to our chicken later. And that's it, we'll go ahead and reserve those 2 things until we need them. At which point we can move on to prep our chicken, which is going to be very easy if you use bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs like I am. And these are pretty much ready to use, except I do like to make 2 cuts all the way down to the bone, about 1 inch apart, at a 90-degree angle to the bone. And that's really going to help our marinade penetrate and penetrate deep. And once all 6 have been slashed as shown, we will transfer those into a zip-top bag, which as you can see I placed in a bowl because of Murphy's Law. Oh yeah, if you don't use a bowl, the bag will leak. And if you use a bowl, the bag never leaks. So you decide. And that's it. Once our chicken is ready to take it, we will make our marinade, which starts with the chopped up inside of our preserved lemon, to which we will add a whole bunch of finely minced garlic. And then we'll season this up with some salt, some freshly ground black pepper, a whole bunch of paprika, some ground cumin, some ground ginger, and then a little touch of chili flake. I'm using Aleppo, but anything will work. We will also add in some finely chopped cilantro and Italian parsley. And some people use one or the other, but I like to use both. And then we'll finish up with a couple tablespoons of olive oil, plus that saffron that we steeped in our chicken broth. And after we dump that in, we'll take a whisk and give this a thorough mixing. And once we have everything nicely emulsified, we will pour that into our bag of chicken, at which point we'll give it a little massage to make sure it's getting everywhere, including and especially in any nooks and crannies. And that's it, we'll squeeze out the air and seal this up, and then we'll let it marinate in the fridge for a minimum of 3 hours, up to overnight, which I think is best. And while it's in the fridge, every once in a while flip it over and give it another little massage. So that's exactly what I did, and the next day I pulled it out, and we'll remove those thighs to a plate. And while we do, we'll scrape off any of that marinade back into the bag, and we'll reserve that until later, since that's going to form the base of our sauce. And then to begin the actual tagine, I'm going to heat up some olive oil over medium-high heat in this heavy-duty braising pan. And once hot, I'm going to place my chicken in skin side down, at which point I'm going to let it cook for about 5 minutes, in an attempt to render as much of the fat out of that skin as I can. And no, we're not doing it for appearance. This is going to look the same either way. And we're certainly not doing it to get crispy skin, because that's not going to happen. But I do think the texture's better, and the flavor's much better if we do this optional step. And after about 5 minutes or so, we can remove that to a plate and we can turn off the heat. And because we're searing something that came from a wet marinade, do not be surprised or upset if it sticks to the pan and tears. That is absolutely not going to be a problem, especially considering that a lot of these recipes actually have you remove the skin. But I much prefer to have that extra flavor and richness that the skin provides. And yes, those last 2 pieces seared perfectly, but again, it does not matter if that happens, since once this dish is cooked, you're not really going to see the skin. And then for the next step, we will add 1 diced onion to all that goodness in the pan, and we'll put our heat on to medium-high, and we will toss in a pinch of salt, a pinch of cinnamon, and a pinch of turmeric. And then we'll cook these onions stirring for about 3 or 4 minutes, or until they've absorbed all that goodness from the bottom of the pan and have started to turn translucent. And once that happens, they're probably going to look something like this. And once we're happy with those, we will place our chicken back in, with the skin side up if it's still attached. And then we'll also drizzle over any accumulated juices from the plate. All right, if there was ever a recipe where you were going to remember to add the accumulated juices, this is the recipe. And then just as importantly, we have to add any of the reserved marinade that we've squeezed and scraped out of the bag, and we'll drizzle that semi-evenly over the top. And that's it. Once everything's been transferred into the pan, we will wait until we see things start bubbling on the bottom. And once they do, we'll cover this tightly and reduce our heat to low, and we will cook this covered for exactly 1 hour. All right, no peeking, no stirring, no doing nothing. Just let it gently cook. And after 1 hour of trying not to do anything, we will uncover and we'll take a spoon and baste each piece. And by now, the aromas coming off of this thing are going to smell absolutely incredible and borderline intoxicating. And as you smell them, I want you to keep something in mind. It is actually somehow going to taste better than it smells, which seems impossible, but still true. And then once those sides have gotten a proper basting, we can go ahead and scatter in our pitted green olives. And we can also at this time add in our cut up, preserved lemon peel. And by the way, depending on what kind of tagine you're making, you can add other things to this, like peppers and tomatoes, which are popular with fish tagines, or dried fruit, which is popular with lamb tagines. But those things are also sometimes used for chicken, so feel free to tweak this as you see fit. I mean, you are after all the dean of your chicken tagine. But for me, this is perfect as shown. And it probably doesn't matter, but at this point I'm going to give everything another basting, since I want a little bit of that cooking liquid to be touching every olive and every piece of peel. And that's it. We can go ahead and cover that back up and continue cooking on low for another 15 or 20 minutes, or until our chicken is very, very tender, as tested with a fork. And of course you make the call, but I want this meat pretty much falling off the bone, so that fork should slide in with almost no effort, which mine did. And then assuming our meat is perfect, we will raise our heat up to medium-high again, and we'll let this cook for another 5 minutes or so, just to reduce some of the juices. And while that's happening, feel free to baste to your heart's content. And how far you reduce things is going to be based on personal preference. Or you can stop right here and leave this nice and juicy, or you can pretty much reduce it all the way until most of the liquids are gone. But I prefer something in between, so I usually go to about this point, where that sauce is thickened up a little bit, and that olive oil and fat from the chicken skin have sort of been emulsified into the sauce. And that's it. I'm going to give it a final baste, and then turn off the heat and serve it up. And by the way, a lot of recipes call for squeezing over some fresh lemon juice at this point, but I don't do that. I think it takes away from the preserved lemon flavor, which is so delicious and so unique that I don't want anything getting in the way. Right, the only thing I'm going to do to garnish this is maybe add a few sprigs of parsley to the top, just for a little bit of color, before finishing up with one more pinch of Aleppo pepper. And that's it. My take on Morocco's famous chicken tagine was ready to enjoy, which I'm going to do right out of the pan with a piece of crusty bread, which is by far my favorite pairing with this, since as profoundly delicious and amazing as the chicken is, the sauce and pan drippings are just as good. And then besides that moist and insanely delicious meat, and that rich, fragrant, incredible sauce, we have those slightly salty, briny bites of olive that basically reset our palates with every bite. And yes, if you're going to serve this to guests, you'll want to make up a nice big pot of couscous, or a nice rice pilaf to pair with it. But no matter what you serve this on or next to, it is one of the world's great recipes, chicken or otherwise. And I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.